All right, is everyone ready to get started? So, Patrick, I see you're on. Are you ready to go?
Yep, I am. You hear me?
Yes, I can.
Cool.
I like that microphone setup you got there.
Thanks. I owe it all to Twitter. I had no idea what I was doing, so I asked Twitter, and Twitter said, "Get that," and I said, "Thanks, Twitter."
That's all you got to do. Ask the internet, and the internet will provide.
Exactly.
All right. So you're welcome to share your screen. Get started.
Okay. All right. Is it up? We good? Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right. Hey, everybody. This is Patrick Kremer from VMware, and today we're talking about skills modernization for the virtual infrastructure admin. I've been working at VMware since 2014 as a pre-sale solution engineer. I've been doing VMware stuff professionally since the 3.0 days all the way back in 2006. The vast majority of my career was primarily sysadmin work. I have a very limited programming background, and for the last year and a half, I've been a VMware Cloud solution architect selling only VMware Cloud on AWS for VMware. Why should we modernize our skills? Anybody recognize this, right? Who's installed Windows 95 from 15 floppies, right? I certainly have. How many hours of my life were wasted on this Norton Ghost screen, right? This is how we used to do it. We don't do it now because it's ridiculous, right?
Multicasting.
Yep.
Good stuff.
Yep. Back in the day, right? We don't do this anymore, right? Because it's horribly inefficient. Now we install Windows from an ISO into a VM, and we make it a template, and we clone it. Except now, even that model is actually starting down a path of obsolescence, and we need to learn some new skills. So back in the day, long time ago, when I first started my career, I didn't go to school to be a developer. My degree is actually in usability, of all things. At the very, very beginning, I spent a little bit of time like throwing a front-end form on Access databases. Like you can create a form wizard and drag things on the canvas and make fields show up where you want them to. You know, not a whole lot to it, not really a developer. But since 2006, my job was all system administration all the time, right? Your classic 3-tier apps, you know, all virtual machines on vSphere, and working with virtualized infrastructure was pretty much the same as physicals. It was just an easier way to do it. I didn't have to ghost the machines anymore. I had templates. I could vMotion. Machines would survive when a host died, but it was pretty much the same work. And throughout my career, programming was scripting. If you've managed any vSphere environment of any size, you will amass a collection of PowerCLI scripts over the years. When I did research for this talk, I found that I'd amassed 440 scripts over the past 10 or 15 years. They're mostly 10 and 20 lines of Google code that I found on the internet somewhere and modified for my purposes. This particular one was a shaming script to catch admins who deployed a VM without changing the description so that we knew who owned it. 10, 20 lines, and most of the standard administrative stuff that you need to do, you can probably find some PowerShell somewhere to do what you need to do. That was programming for me for pretty much my entire sysadmin career. 2013, VMware releases NSX. And just like when we were doing P2Vs and administering VMs versus physical servers, it was the same networking concepts. It had all the same ideas. It was just a different way to do it. But now here we are, we're sysadmins, and we have all these developer words, microservices and GitHub and Kubernetes and containers. And what makes it so difficult when you come out of infrastructure background is it's not like P2V and it's not like NSX networking, right? It's not learning how to do something you already know in a different way. It's like learning a whole new profession, and that's why it's intimidating. And that's why people are kind of afraid to start, and you don't know where to start. This is CNCF, a zoom of just part of the cloud native landscape. Just that alone is overwhelming. Like, what on earth am I supposed to do with that? Well, here's the entire slide. So you're an infrastructure person and you say, okay, I'm going to get into cloud native, and you look at this and you're like, what am I going to do? Where do I start? So what I ended up doing, I'm really bad at learning things just to learn them. I need a project. And what I started with was VEBA, the VMware Event Broker Appliance, which is an event-driven product for vSphere. It's open source, and it uses Kubernetes, which I knew absolutely not one thing about when I started down this path. But I'm able to learn Kubernetes in a context of something that I know really well, which is vCenter. So when you run a vCenter, you have, when things happen, anything happens, you have an HA event, a data store gets full, any event that fires in vCenter, you have the same 3 alarm actions that you've had since the beginning of time. You can send an email, you can send a trap, or you can run a command on the virtual center, run a script. None of that is available in the product that I sell, VMC. That area of virtual center is locked out. So that's an issue, right? When we're talking about VMware Cloud, and we need a way around it. So what VEBA does is it monitors all of the events on a virtual center, and it lets you react to them programmatically, fire a script for any event, not just the specific limited set of events that you can do inside vCenter, right? There's, I don't know, 100 or so that you can build a vCenter alarm on. But there's like 1,800 events that can fire. Like every action that happens in vSphere infrastructure fires an event on the vCenter, and you can react to them programmatically. So a couple of functions that are like right out of the box with VEBA. One of my favorites from having patched hundreds of clusters over many years is maintenance mode alarms. Just a very simple function. When you pop a host into maintenance mode, all the alarms get shut off. Because why do I need an email alarm that tells me that a host that I rebooted myself manually went down? I don't need that kind of spam. I know, I rebooted it. So you put a host in maintenance mode, that event fires, that event is intercepted by VEBA, and the alarm actions are disabled so you don't get spammed. You pull the host back out of maintenance mode, and alarm actions are enabled, right? Turn back on. So very simple, and yet very effective at eliminating noise. Now, this other one on the right that comes with VEBA right out of the box, HA event notification. So if a host goes down, HA fires and restarts virtual machines, and you get an email list of all the VMs that were restarted and when they were restarted. So it's pretty cool, right out of the box. Something that I've had to do as an admin, go, hey, give me a list of everything that failed. And then that vsish command is a nice one. That forces a purple screen of death. So you can, that's how I caused the screenshot for this email to happen. I purple screen part of the home lab. But it's really fun to mess with somebody too in a lab, make them think that they blew up a host by SSHing and firing off that vsish command. Other functions inside VEBA, maybe you want to add a tag when a VM is built or when it's powered on, or maybe you want to track changes for a VM. You have a sensitive VM that any time somebody makes any change, you want that logged to like a Slack channel, or maybe certain events you want sent to PagerDuty. Sort of all that stuff is built into VEBA, and it's possible because it's monitoring every event on the virtual center. So like I was saying before, we can't do normal alarm actions in VMware Cloud on AWS. That area is locked out. So back in November of 19, I had a customer that needed to send some emails on alarm actions, and I'm asking in Slack, and I'm like, how can I do this? And a product manager said, hey, there's this open source project, VEBA, that can probably help. Okay, so I go out to the Fling site, and I'm like, it's just an OVF. I'll go ahead and deploy it. It deploys, and then I read the documentation. And the first thing says, clone repo. I'm like, what is that? I don't speak this language. And it says using Git and check something out. And then step 2 down there says, I didn't even know what YML was. I now know that it's YAML. And I'd heard of a JSON file, but I'd never used them. So I'm like, what am I doing here? So I took a look at this YAML file and I thought, okay, well, it's just a config file. This isn't too complex. I'm going to just SSH to this appliance and look around and see what's there. And I see all this, a bunch of containerd and kworker and cube stuff. And I'm like, where's Apache? Where's my Nginx? Where's MySQL? Where's the stuff that I understand as a sysadmin? Well, it's not there. So I'm just like, I have no idea what to do. So I reply to product management and I'm like, VEBA is a developer's tool. I can't use this. And the next day, William Lamb, who I'm sure everybody on this call knows from his extensive community contributions, says, VEBA is actually targeted at virtual infrastructure admins. So I said, okay. So Amazon reInvent was coming up that next week. And William offered to meet with me. He's like, hey, we're going to sit down for an hour, and I'm going to prove to you that VEBA really is for VI admins. So I said, okay. And so I'm going to show you these dates just to keep a couple dates in mind. So reInvent was that first week in December there, December of 2019. I met with William on December 5th and flew home from Vegas on the 6th. So I didn't really look at this stuff again until December 8th. So keep December 8th in your head. So as I like to do, I thought, okay, William convinced me. I'm going to go ahead and do this. And how am I going to learn it? Well, teach it. So I decided I'm going to blog it. I'm going to blog everything that I do and everything that I learn. And I'm going to do it from a perspective of a sysadmin that knows absolutely nothing, because that's exactly what I was. I knew nothing about this stuff. And so I had to learn about GitHub, because that's where the code is sitting. So Git is an open source version control system for your code. And GitHub is a cloud service that's built around Git. GitHub is a place where developers all over the world can work on the same project simultaneously. And it currently hosts over 100 million repositories. What's a repository, you ask? Well, it's just a project. A repository is just a receptacle for storing code. And here's a couple of the repos that I've worked on, public repos. That shows up in your GitHub account. So I had to learn a little bit about that. If you want to talk about some imposter syndrome, right? I know nothing about this going into December of 2019, absolutely nothing. And you look at some of these names, and some of them, you'll recognize publicly. Some of them you won't, but they're all just highly experienced, very good developers. And then there's me. I'm like, I don't belong here. If you look at GitHub, GitHub shows you all of the contributions that you have made to open source over the past year. So look at some of these folks on the project. 374, 242, 413 open source contributions. The darker the green color, the more contributions you've made on a particular day, right? So here's them. There's me. Nothing. So I went into this apprehensive and not at all confident that I would ever pick anything up at all. But every single person here on this team has helped me, and they want to help. And they want this open source project to be successful. And they've helped me in internal Slack, and they've helped customers in public Slack. So the help is there if you want to learn. It's really out there. And with just a little bit of guidance, I learned, hey, things actually make a little bit of sense if you use the right tools. You don't look at a Kubernetes application using PS, right? You use kubectl. And containers run in these pods. And containers run code. Pods are a group of containers, and they're organized into namespaces. So this one kubectl get pods -a, and suddenly there's like a sense of order and sense to what's going on here. And they taught me another command, kubectl logs. So I can actually look at the logs of the pod, and now I can actually see what's going on. So just two little commands, and suddenly I can interact with this cloud native app the way I'm used to. This kubectl logs command is pretty much the same as tail -f, which if you've done anything on any flavor of Unix, Linux ever, you've tailed a log file before. Same stuff. So I asked you to remember December 8th as a date, and I want to call your attention here to December 10th. So 2 days later, so 2 days of messing around with this stuff, and I fixed a typo. It was my first open source commit. And all I did is I deleted the letter E, right? That was it. My first open source contribution was literally erasing one character. But I did it, right? I did it. And it took about 2 days of trying to learn and understand Git. But if you take nothing else away from this talk, what I'm telling you is an infrastructure person can learn this stuff. You can learn it. It is absolutely doable. It isn't all that horribly complex. So I fixed one typo. I thought, well, I'll fix more. So my next contribution, I fixed 7 typos. Again, it was all documentation because I didn't really know anything about how to change the code or do anything with it. So where do you start? Well, start with the docs. That's good. And the blog series grew. So I did the first post on deployment, and then I wrote about what I needed to get on my laptop to be able to grab the code from GitHub. And then I wrote how to get the code. And then I wrote about how to push a sample function into VEBA, and then how to make changes to the VEBA source code. So it built on itself over the course of many months until, I actually have a decent handle on how to make changes. And the blog posts, they all come from this place of not knowing anything, right? Because I knew nothing. I was starting basically from scratch. And it's installation, right? So it shows you what you should see when you install it, and troubleshooting commands like that kubectl git pods command. It's got basic Git in there, all the basic Git that you need to be able to get the code down and make some very basic changes. And if you look at my list of GitHub contributions, right? Again, I started with typos, and then I did a little bit of Power CLI, right? Because looking at somebody else's PowerShell code and modifying it to do what I wanted to do is something that I've done forever, and most of us have done forever. You find somebody's Power CLI sample and change it. And that's the same thing that I'm doing here. Right? That's a lot of what I did, just changing a little bit of code that's already out there, standing on somebody else's work and improving it. That's sort of the essence of open source. And suddenly now this isn't a big blank slate. There's actual contributions throughout the year to open source code. My contributions to the community grew. And then this popped up a couple months ago. I thought was pretty cool. GitHub decided to do this code vault where they decided to preserve a bunch of code permanently in like a vault, like a frozen vault under the ground, like in Antarctica. And so like code that I actually wrote is now sitting in a code vault somewhere, which I thought was pretty slick for somebody who's not a developer. So starting down this VEBA road has really sort of changed things that I can do both personally and professionally. This is contributions to an internal code repo. So not public yet, internal to VMware, but it's a fling. I'm working on a fling that will be released relatively soon, we hope. So hopefully you'll get to see the stuff that I've been working on. My first contribution was in December, and this one was in Python, not Power CLI. And I didn't really know Python, but I read a little bit of what was already out there. And I wrote a little bit, and then I got really stuck. I'm like, this is maybe a little too deep for me. So I took a Python course, right? A couple hours, a LinkedIn Learning Python course. And I learned a little. I took a little course, and I wrote a little more Python, and I read a little more Python, and became a little more comfortable every day, just doing very small things, right? So there isn't... These aren't massive changes or huge things that I was doing. It was little incremental learning every day until I started to get a little bit of a handle on Python. And it's also made an impact outside of work, right? So due to COVID-19, in the recent election, obviously vote by mail utilization has exploded, and county clerks publish a daily report on the status of vote by mail. So who requested a ballot, when they requested it, and a status code. And I've blurred this out, even though this whole thing, voter information is public record and vote by mail is public record. I blurred them out anyway. I don't really need them in my slide deck. But what political parties do during an election is something called a ballot chase. You call voters who have had ballots rejected, and make sure that they actually fix their ballot, right? To make sure that the vote that they already cast actually gets counted. And the clerk publishes this in a PDF, which is like an utterly worthless data source. What am I supposed to do with a 450-page PDF? You can't really call on that. You can't analyze the data. You could have people manually wade through it, but that's not an efficient way to distribute work. And you can't copy paste it out of this file because there's no field delimiters. So the data is effectively locked away. But then I thought, well, maybe I can use Python. I've been doing some Python stuff at work. And I looked around and I found a PDF module called PyPDF. And through tons of, again, the same stuff that I've been doing with Python and I've been doing with PowerShell my entire career, I Googled and I searched and I looked for what people had already done, right? Going through a PDF and extracting text is something that has been solved before. So I borrowed their code. And again, much like working on anything else, I read a little, I searched a little, I wrote a little, read, search, write, read, search, write. And over the course of many weeks, I managed to make incremental improvements on the script. The first iteration could just extract the text. And then the next iteration was able to parse out rows and columns, which was really interesting, considering there were no delimiters. That was kind of a pain to figure out. But by the end, I was able to extract the data and able to take the knowledge that I learned doing this and take it back and incorporate it in some of the open source stuff that I've been able to do at VMware. So really a huge part of working in technology and a huge part of what you do on-prem running VMware infrastructure is seeing what other people have done and modifying it to your own purpose. It's no different here in this DevOpsy world. It's the same stuff, right? You stand on the shoulders of giants and make an incremental improvement. It's the exact same thing. And I don't think there's any better example than this. This is a bug fix out of VEBA. A bug fix out of VEBA. This is a modern app, Kubernetes app, right? And the symptom of this problem was that anytime a cluster name, the vCenter cluster name, had a space and a hyphen in it, this function would blow up, right? It would have a meltdown. And in the end, what's actually happening? Well, you see xargs, pwsh, and a function, a PowerShell function. So what's happening is the PowerShell for Linux is being invoked and it's being passed a function name, and then it's being passed a JSON payload that contains the cluster name. And what are arguments in PowerShell? Well, they're a hyphen. So it was interpreting the hyphen as an argument and erroring out. How do you escape characters in PowerShell? If you need to pass something with a hyphen into a PowerShell script, you add it in double quotes. So how do you do that with xargs? Well, the few characters of code is what I added to fix the problem. But this is an xargs command. I didn't learn that just to fix that. I've known about xargs forever because xargs has been around forever. This is at least 40 years old. At least 40 years old. This is the earliest mention that I could find. Unix System 3 manual from June of 1980. So we have VEBA, this modern app, Kubernetes, containers, and Git. And guess what? It's xargs under the covers. So your existing sysadmin skills and your existing knowledge on Linux, it can be put to really good use in these modern apps because they're they're on a foundation of Unix and Linux. Another example of a change that I was able to make that, again, in December of 19, I couldn't have imagined ever that I would be making a change to an OVA UI, to the actual deployment. So if you go out and you deploy, you decide, hey, I'm going to check out VEBA after this talk, and you go deploy it, you're going to have a place to check a box to automatically enable SSH. I was deploying a lot of VEBA, and I got tired of manual enabling SSH, so I wanted a checkbox to turn it on automatically. So that's in the actual OVA now. What did I really change, right? So the top, this is just bash. This is bash script, and it's no different than any other bash script you've ever seen or tried to modify in the Linux world. It's a bash script with an if check, and it's running a system control, a couple of commands. there's really not a whole lot to this. This line, do I really know what it does? Not really. I stole it from the line above and modified it for my purposes, but it's just setting an environment variable. And this is just XML, and I didn't write that either. I stole it from the one above and changed it to fit my purposes. So the deeper you get into this stuff, right? I mean, there are things that are very complex, and there's a ton of stuff that I don't know, but you can absolutely get into it with your existing sysadmin skills, and you can have an impact, and you can learn it. So if this discussion has sort of inspired you to maybe take a look at VEBA, all the links are here. I'd love you to check out VEBA. And if not, that's okay. I really encourage you to find some open source project that speaks to you and start diving in and learning this stuff, because we need these skills. We need these development skills. You need them as a sysadmin moving forward for the next 10 or 20 years, right? So take a look. All the links are here, and that's all I have. And I'm ready for questions.
Anyone want to unmute yourselves and ask Patrick any questions? Feel free. I didn't see anything come across in the chat. Can you, a question in the chat, Patrick, can you share the PDF? Can you share a PDF of your slides?
Yeah, I'll post them on my website. Yep, I will post that. There's an older version. I'll post the latest version of the deck up there. And you just want me to send that to you, Ben?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Yep, I'll do that.
There's a question. There's one more question that just came up in the chat.
Notification about which
email notifications.
Yes, that function is it's written in, I think it's I think it's a PowerShell. I think it's a Power CLI function. But yeah, it's built into VEBA, and VEBA sees the HA event and causes the function to fire. Kudos on the VEBA here. Thanks, Alex. I haven't had a haircut in months either. It's starting to get a little ridiculous.
All right.
All right, cool.
All right. Thank you, Patrick. That was awesome.